Now inside of 5 minutes remaining
GLS
until
go
launch
for
time.
LH2 high flow bleed check.
We've heard calls in the last couple of minutes that pressurization is underway on the core stage propellant tanks. NASA has confirmed that the 4 RS-25 engines are conditioned for launch. They're at the proper temperatures.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
Now the 4 core stage auxiliary power units, or KPUs, are being fired up at the launch pad. These are the hydraulic power systems that power the steering mechanisms on the 4 RS-25 engines at the base of the core stage. In the next few moments, we should see the steering profile check of the 4 RS-25 engines.
GLS is go for purge sequence 4.
We've heard the call from the ground launch sequencer controller that they are go for purge sequence 4. Inside of 3 minutes until launch. Pressurization now underway on the core stage liquid oxygen tank. T-minus 2.5 minutes. And there we have the engine steering profile check on the core stage. The KPUs, the core stage auxiliary power units, driving thrust vector control actuators to check the steering profile of the RS-25 engines. These 4 engines will generate about 500,000 pounds of thrust apiece, burning a liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen.
Internal power.
T-minus 1 minute 40 seconds. The core stage will be transitioning to internal battery power momentarily.
GLS is go for core stage to internal power.
T-minus 60 seconds, 1 minute remaining until the launch of NASA's Artemis 1 lunar test flight. Mission Control in Houston will take control of the Orion spacecraft and the launch after liftoff. At T-minus 30 seconds, the ALS, the autonomous launch sequencer on the Space Launch System, will take control of the countdown from the ground launch sequencer.
GLS is go for ALS.
And there's the transition to automated launch sequencer, 30 seconds to go. Ignition of the 4 RS-25 engines is planned at T-minus 6 seconds.
20. 15.
T-minus 10 seconds.
GLS is go
Hydrogen
for core stage
igniters have
start.
fired. There's the sound suppression water system. RS-25 engine ignition. Booster ignition. And liftoff of the Space Launch System, Artemis 1, on the way to the moon.
5 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
Space Launch System arcing toward the east from Kennedy Space Center.
Good control on the roll from teams in
8.8 million pounds of ground-shaking thrust.
Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into
big
launch.
rumble here at the press site about 4 miles
of
from the pad.
On the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in mission control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring.
Hope you enjoyed the sounds of the powerful solid rocket boosters on the Space Launch System. We're now about 20 seconds from the expected burnout of the 2 solid rocket boosters. They will jettison to fall into the Atlantic Ocean. They will not be recovered.
Standing by
mission.
For solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter.
There is burnout and jettison. Both solid rocket boosters have separated
Confirmation that the solid
from
rocket
the Space
boosters
Launch
have
System.
separated. These
Great view of the 4 core
boosters.
stage engines continuing to fire.
Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion. All 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange.
Those
2
engines
minutes and
burning at
36 seconds into the flight.
109% of rated performance.
Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated.
We've heard confirmation from Mission Control Houston that the service module aerodynamic fairings have jettisoned.
And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well.
And we've heard confirmation from MCC Houston that the launch abort system motor, jettison motor, has fired.
We just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange.
Four minutes, 10 seconds into the flight. We're about halfway through the core stage's performance on this Artemis 1 test flight. No issues reported.
We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds
so
into the flight of Artemis 1.
4 RS-25
so
engines
far, we've
continue
had
firing.
A clean ascent.
A clean
we
ascent.
We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good.
5 minutes into the flight, 3 minutes remaining in the
Our core stage
burn.
main
All
engine
4
cutoff
engines
time is about 8
continue
minutes
firing.
and 3 seconds. We are now at 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight.
4 minutes or 5 minutes, 40 seconds.
42 seconds into the mission. We are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center.
Everything looking good. A little more than 2 minutes remaining in the core stage burn.
Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free.
Core stage engines continue to be visible from our location here at Kennedy
now
Space
traveling
Center
over 10,000 miles per
horizon.
hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight.
The Space Launch System continues downrange. Plus 6.5 minutes.
About 1.5 minutes now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire maximum thrust.
Here's a neat animation from NASA showing what the current configuration is of the Space Launch System. The 2 boosters jettisoned, as we saw a few minutes ago. All 4 engines on the core stage continue firing.
Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston.
Miles downrange. Artemis 1 has now disappeared from view behind some clouds just above the eastern horizon.
As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down.
The 4 RS-25 engines are throttling down to maintain a constant acceleration
now 7 minutes, 45
on the
seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour.
16,000 miles per hour, the current velocity.
Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff.
MECO, main engine cutoff.
And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deployed approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about
At this point, the ICPS, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and Orion are in a preliminary orbit around the Earth. In this orbit, at least according to predictions, the spacecraft should be in an elliptical orbit ranging between about 16 nautical miles and more than 900 nautical miles in altitude. That low point or perigee is within Earth's atmosphere. That's why the RL-10 engine on the upper stage needs to ignite at about 53 minutes or so after launch for what's called a perigee raise maneuver to raise that low point or perigee above the atmosphere. That'll put the Orion spacecraft in a stable orbit. Right now, the core stage, which has been jettisoned, as well as the ICPS and Orion, are on a trajectory that would result in a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean after completing nearly 1 orbit of the Earth. So this upper stage has some work to do initially to reach an Earth orbit, and then it'll be followed at about T plus 90 minutes by the translunar injection burn. One of the next milestones will be the extension or unfurling of the 4 solar array wings on the service module of the Orion spacecraft. This is one of the European elements of the vehicle. That is set to begin at about 18 minutes, about 8 minutes from now, 18 minutes after launch. And that will take roughly 12 minutes or so to complete. Those solar arrays are necessary to begin recharging the batteries on Orion.